For any of you deep tech founders at home that are trying to do something, understand that you're not alone if people don't believe in either your idea or the fact that the science can work or that the fact that the market's going to be there.
So it's like the tech is hard,
yes.
and then you have to make it into a company.
Correct.
That is like a 10x multiple of difficulty.
And the last thing I'll say here is it took a lot of people saying no until someone says yes. And then once you get the first yes, the second yes is even easier because you've already been validated once.
This is a conversation with James Sinka, a chemist, deep tech founder, and systems thinker who's building at the edge of science and entrepreneurship. From perovskite solar cells to decentralized biotech, James has launched startups, led deep tech communities, and now serves as the Chief Science Officer at Bioprotocol. This is the Acc Podcast. Please enjoy. Hi, James.
Hello, Shriya.
How's it going?
Good.
Good?
I'm glad we finally got to do this.
I know. Super excited for this conversation. You know me, right? I'm an undergrad, second year, third year student at Harvard now.
Crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm 20 years old. But you're actually 21 years old, not even a year, basically just a year older than me when you spun out your first undergraduate research thesis. And your vision was to print solar panels the way that we print newspapers and magazines.
Exactly.
Really interesting vision. And that was work that you did in your lab at RT, right? You were the youngest member to be funded by the state of New York, the state of New York's energy department for that research.
Yeah,
and that
NYSERDA specifically is the NY, New York State Research and Energy Department Authority.
Got
yeah,
it.
They had a program at the time. It was called Nexus New York. I don't know if it exists anymore, but it was basically like their effort to fund clean tech. And yeah, I was the youngest person that they'd funded. They never funded someone who hadn't even gotten their undergraduate degree yet. So that was like, wow, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Wow. And that was $75,000.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which in the like climate of biotech doesn't seem that much, but it actually is a huge amount of money to get you started, right?
Yeah. It was crazy back then. Maybe a little bit of backstory before that. My focus was in trying to do what were called at the time organic photovoltaics. Actually, I still think they're called OPVs. This was basically a new class of solar materials where you would take the same dyes that are put into clothes and you would modify them to basically make semiconducting versions. And the thesis or the idea behind this was like dyes are abundantly available. They're made out of organic materials. They can be made at low costs. And the professor that I was working with, he was he was the one making the solar cells themselves, but we had a partner professor that was an organic chemist who was producing the dyes. So it was like a joint group. So the organic chemists would produce the synthetic, the dyes through organic synthetic chemistry. And then our lab would make the devices of the solar panels and we called them to test them.
Gotcha.
And I started to do some research. Actually, I remember being very insistent that at 18, I was like, I need to do research in your lab because I was very passionate about climate change. And I was like, this seems like a way we can fight climate change. You know what I mean? Really excited, really passionate. And I remember getting a call from him after doing some work with one of his master's students. I was still sitting in my freshman year dorm at 18. Or was it 19 at the time? 18, 19. And basically was like, all right, James, fine, we can try you out. Come into the lab and you can do a few hours. We'll see what happens. And then kind of the rest is history from there. But the really big moment for me was when I actually started shifting research directions from my research advisor. Chris is incredible. Like, I really appreciate all and respect all the things that he did for me. But I kind of had a vision that was different from the OPV squarene cells that he was working on in the direction of perovskites. And I didn't exactly know how I was going to make it happen, but I thought like, we have to try. It's worth it. Yeah. Fuck it. I'd regret it if I didn't. And so one thing led to another, got a small amount of funding here, there, the other place. And then it ultimately, the culmination of it was a $75K from New York State.
Wow.
Yeah.
Couple things there.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about the environment of your lab, right? Like, I think that in academia, people aren't really thinking about commercialization, right? It is a completely different incentive. If you're like a PI in a lab, like you just want to publish, you want the prestige associated with it, you have a salary, right?
Yeah.
And especially for like facultied institution, this is not something they think about, and this is not something they really care about. And so it really is on the onus of whoever wants to spin something out or whoever wants to take that to commercialization to really push that idea forward. And that is something that you ultimately did pursue, but you did face backlash from your PI, right? Like your PI was like, this is so
ridiculous.
Crazy. Yeah, talk to me about that because the thing is with deep tech, right? It has to work. The science just needs to be pure and honest and genuine. And you would think that a PI who has been working on this for 20, 30 years would know what is going to work and what's not going to work.
Yeah.
And did you feel any sort of, oh crap, like my PI doesn't really think this is a good direction to go in? Is that something that I should do still? Or were you like, screw it, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. I think this is going to work. I'm going to believe in myself.
Yeah. I think in hindsight, it's always easy to paint the picture that I always knew that it was going to work out.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put myself back in the position of what it was like to be then. And the thing that I distinctly recall that not scared me, but surprised me, because I was 19 at the time when I told him, look, I wanted to change the direction of our research lab. The thing that stuck with me was, I know you're wrong. And that's something very ballsy to say to someone who is a PI of a lab, has a PhD, is commanding all of this research dollars. And yet I still, like, there was something about the first principles argument to me of the squaring solar cells we were producing were novel in that they were adding some small leaf to the tree of knowledge. But fundamentally, they wouldn't make a net impact in the world, even if this research continued to progress in a generous way, if you made generous assumptions for the next decade or two. And when I thought about the alternative that was presented with perovskite, so actually the way I learned about these was I went to a SPIE Photonics West. It's a conference that's hosted every year in San Diego. And I presented some of the work that I did, like it was like a poster after my first summer research work. And I learned about perovskites there. It was either Michael Gretzel or one of the other leaders in the perovskite space had recently just announced like a breakthrough 19.4, 19.6% power conversion efficiency. So for context, like the solar panels that are on people's roofs vary anywhere from 18 to 22. And so 19% for an organic-based set of materials, it turns out now they're classified as like their own category, but they were organic, inorganic hybrid materials. Anyways, in any event, the perovskites hitting that 19.4 or 6% power conversion efficiency ratio was like a game changer for this space. And we, for the first time in the industry, had something that could actually compete with silicon on not just energy density perspective, but also on your manufacturing capacity. And the thing that attracted me to Chris's approach with organic solar cells was the idea very early on that you could actually turn these things, because dyes are used to make clothing, that they already have very scalable manufacturing processes they kind of lend themselves into. When you make a silicon solar cell, there's a lot of subtractive manufacturing. It turns out we can use additive manufacturing instead. It uses less material, it's higher yield, so on and so forth. So the kind of base understanding, when I looked at all the first principles, we had a better material, the manufacturing process should be better, squarians aren't really going to go anywhere, perovskites are going to change the game. I was at RIT, which had a ton of expertise from Kodak. A lot of the folks the research scientists who were at Kodak came to RIT afterwards, after Kodak went bust, in order to do a lot of their chemistry research. We actually just opened up a additive manufacturing and printing center at RIT. Like it was in construction when I joined my freshman year, and like it just opened up, and I was like, this just seems like the perfect storm. I would be like, I know you're wrong, and so I'm going to risk it. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I had some intuition that I would figure it out. And I had concepts of a plan of what I might do. And obviously, in the meantime, I had to continue to pay my dues, so to speak. So I continued to work in his lab while trying to figure out what my path to getting financing and funding was. And my first breakthrough there was actually, there was a club on campus called Engineers for a Sustainable World. And they gave me my first like few $100s for materials. I put together a presentation where I was like, squarings, perovskites, order of magnitude difference. I'm working on working with an inkjet printer to make formulations of squarians we can print. I want to take that same substrate and apply it to perovskites. Problem, I don't have any money to do this. You guys, you can have credit for my research if you give me the materials. And so there was like some Weebly website, I don't even know if it's still up anymore. That goes to show how scrappy you were.
Totally.
And so, yeah, that got me the first money to do my first experiments. And Chris, my PI, respected me enough to like let me use the lab. But I had to be dead last for everything. So I couldn't use any of the materials or any of the hardware if anyone else is using it. So I had to like go late or during the weekends where the masters and PhD students weren't doing their stuff. But yeah, like in the corners here and there, I managed to start making progress. And then it eventually snowballed and it started becoming an inevitability. But I had to just figure out, so I had to stick to my first principles, like belief that I had something that was better. And then some kind of a path forward that had some positive expected value that I could at least try and push against. And frankly, if I couldn't find the money after a year worth of persisting, maybe I would have pivoted and tried something else. Who knows? But yeah, I think it was a mixture of perseverance. And also what I'm really realizing now in this conversation is it forced me to learn how to like sharpen my pitch well enough to convince other people that I was on a good idea. I hadn't done any entrepreneurial training. I was just like pure scientist, right? Degree in chemistry. But I had to learn how to communicate what my like persistent thesis was enough that someone gave me money. Yeah, it was not, success wasn't guaranteed, but I knew that I had something that was worth pushing against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's so hard to convince other people that your idea is good and that it's worth funding. Like you in your brain, this is going to work. I know why it's going to work. The science will work. The economics of it will work. But like to take all of that and concisely pitch it to someone who maybe has no idea about anything in the field, or this is a really niche subtopic of the field that they maybe have worked on adjacently, but they don't know what you're working on. And so like having to like be persuasive enough, basically, like this idea is worth you giving me your money for. That must be really hard. I'm sure that
it is.
Startup founders face that struggle every day. And I think it's way harder. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the perception for me is that's way harder for deep tech founders to convince people to fund their idea. Because Jared talks about this a lot, like YC, and we'll get to this, YC takes a lot of deep tech founders, right? Like they really appreciate what they're able to do. And some of the most successful companies, deep tech companies, have actually come from YC. And it's really like, in a way, you need to do less. Almost like you need to do more de-risking in general, but you don't need to have like revenue. You don't need to have
sometimes it's hard to have revenue.
Yeah, exactly. Like that itself is hard. People would argue, oh, like with deep tech, you can just like pitch your idea. You don't even have to have anything working. Like you can just pitch it and maybe they'll give you money. But like, how do you de-risk it? Like, obviously there's LOIs, but those are tremendously difficult to get. Like how do you even start?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that can be said about this. Maybe I want to just start by like validating that it is extremely hard, right? So for any of you deep tech founders at home that are trying to do something, understand that you're not alone if people don't believe in either your idea or the fact that the science can work or that the fact that the market's going to be there. Like what you're doing fundamentally with a deep tech startup or a deep tech endeavor is you're taking the inherent science risk that exists there and you're multiplying it by the sort of like already existing startup risk. And so whether or not you have a deep tech startup, so whether or not the science has been de-risked or proven, or now it's just a matter of engineering, you still have all the challenges with creating a startup. That does not go away. So
it's like the tech is hard and then you have to make it into a company.
Correct.
That is like a 10x multiple of difficulty. But yeah, continue.
No, 100%. And interestingly, I've heard, and I've actually seen this as well, the benefit of doing it is that your moats are way larger, because now someone has to compete and beat you or catch up to you on two different miracles.
Yeah.
Especially if you have something that's patented, and we can talk about the pros and cons, the ethics of patents, so on and so forth, but it's almost like your moats are also taller, and then the net like value of what you can extract is higher. And there's very few examples where that's the contrary, so like very few pure tech companies that end up being extremely valuable. Most of them eventually or inevitably get into some amount of like hardware engineering or even basic fundamental science. Even like Google does some fundamental science, like quantum is like a big thing. Quantum at Microsoft is a big thing. Anyways, so that's a large way of saying that there is no shortcut. You do on some degree have to understand what are the minimum amounts of proof points you have to find scientifically. And different people are looking for different amounts or different ratios of the market hypothesis, so the LOI, like we talked about, versus the scientific hypothesis.
Sure.
And initially, I didn't have any market hypothesis at all. It was just pure scientific data. And so the people that would give me money were purely folks who were already academic friendly. And so if you look at the kind of pools of capital, that was not venture capitalists. Like my research was way too early. And eventually I did go and pitch at VCs, and we can talk about what that was like. I learned a ton. But it was fundamentally people who saw the potential in where my research could be going and wanted to take a bet on scalable perovskite production, knowing that we have a ton of horsepower here at RIT from Kodak. We have a huge ability to actually make prototype cells. We had this huge new like center on campus we can use to actually like do some pilot runs. And so all of the right scientific R&D pieces lined up, and that's the story that I found that worked. And then also people just liked my tenacity. They thought it's true. You don't get a lot of people that are like, you know what? I think my PI is wrong. I'm going to do it differently. And I got money.
Yeah.
And I showed results. So it was, you do have to stack the deck, so to speak, in your way. And the last thing I'll say here is it took a lot of people saying no until someone says yes. And then once you get the first yes, the second yes is even easier because you've already been validated once. And so almost to think you might have to get 100 no's before you can get your first yes, but it won't take you another 100 no's to get your second yes. It might only take you 10 or 5, and it gets easier from there. Yeah. So yeah, find your foothold and
that's good to know. Like the Hills coefficient of...
I haven't heard that. What is the Hills coefficient?
In biochemistry, like for certain proteins, if one receptor or if one ligand binds to a receptor, the binding affinity for other receptors increases.
That makes sense. Yeah,
it's like that.
It's a cascade.
Totally. Yeah,
that's
it's
cool.
with compounding effects.
Huh. Hill's coefficient.
Yes.
That's cool. I just learned something.
You can use it in your colloquial.
My mom's going to love that.
Yeah, I don't know if people understand it. Okay, so very cool. You went from solar cells and then pivoted to coffee brewing, which maybe we can talk about.
Cheers to coffee.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, you're super interested in coffee extraction. Talk to me about that change, because that is my understanding is that like you and your co-founders were like drinking a lot of coffee, and you guys realized that, hey, this process like should not be taking days to brew coffee. Like we can figure out faster solution.
Correct.
What is like the underlying motive behind these two different ventures? Because they're vastly different. Originator is the same idea, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Right. And so was it just this idea that do you have this like innate drive to find things that are faster, cheaper, like more efficient? Would you say that's one of your motivators?
I would say that there's a large part of my personality, perhaps, that people in college would attest to. They would say you're too much of an efficiency maxi. And I definitely overdid it in college. I think I found a healthy balance, but different depending on who you ask.
And then you went into wearables, which is definitely like efficiency.
Quantified self. Yeah, exactly. And so what's interesting is all of these things publicly revealed themselves, like the quantified self. I was already messing with tracking things on my own self beforehand. I got into low carbon keto back in 2014, 15, 16 time. And that was before it was cool. And back when I got into quantified self, I learned about this from Tim Ferriss, for example. And like these sort of ventures ended up manifesting publicly because there was a lot of sort of digestion and behind the scenes work that no one had seen that I was personally working on and grinding on my own. And it's really interesting because this reminds me of a quote. I want to attribute this one to Paul Graham, but it's something along the lines of what nerds are working on in their weekends will become what the jobs of people in 10 years from now are doing as a career. It's obviously not always the case, but it tends to be that these things that look like their side project or their hobbies or they're just toys become something that's real. And there's plenty of examples from LLMs to like social networking and everything in between. So the question was, how did we end up getting in the coffee space?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was also nonlinear and non-expected. Maybe I'll tell you from here looking backwards, and then I'll kind of give you the chronological. So recently I was diagnosed with ADHD. And so I think inadvertently, without realizing it, I was medicating ADHD because for those who don't know, stimulants like caffeine help with managing ADHD. And so I think my interest in coffee, because I didn't consume much coffee at all while I was in high school, but in college, it was like really hard in the grind set to do all this solar work. It took a lot. And I had to go to a process of learning myself, self-mastery. And I'm sure you know what that's like, where you're demanding more of yourself than you previously had at this stage in your life. And that's where a lot of the quantified self and biohacking and whatnot also came into the picture. But in any event, we as a team were working on this project. We called it Ambient PV. That was like the spin out name. And we were drinking, myself, my co-founder, and like the other scientists we were working with, were drinking roughly about a gallon of cold brew a day, which is a bunch of coffee. It's a ton. And part of that was also like our roommates and our friends, but like amongst my social circle, like a gallon of cold brew a day is a lot of coffee. And if cold brew takes 24 hours to make, and that was impossibly long to wait. And suffering from the demand to have delicious coffee, we're like, okay, how can we make this better? Did a little bit of research. And then I remember during the summer one year, I don't know if it's like this at Harvard, but at RIT, summer is when folks often will do their research projects.
Right. That's what I'm actually here doing.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, there you go. And so but that also means that some of the labs that don't otherwise have a researcher working in them are like often unused. So we would bring back some of the lab equipment to our home to do some experiments on coffee to figure out like what might work.
What lab equipment?
So it turns out that what ended up working was temperature controlled ultrasonication.
Okay.
And so brought back a couple of the sonicators and some other things. We had a vortex mixer, and we tried a bunch of other things as well as things we could try to increase the kinetics essentially, or the thermodynamics of getting cold water to extract out caffeine and other flavonoids. And it turns out that temperature controlled ultrasonics were the key. We wanted to do some experimentation on lasers. And so hear me out. The way photovoltaics work is essentially a photon will come in and it'll excite an electron from its ground state to its excited state.
Okay.
That induces what's called a dipole moment, and it actually shifts the sort of electrophysical or electrochemical properties of that material or that molecule in that moment. water is extremely polar. It's a very polar material. And so I had this thesis of, okay, what if we could find the right frequencies of light to shine onto coffee to excite some of whatever the materials were there. We don't know which ones they are, but whichever ones are reactive in this kind of way to induce a dipole moment to temporarily increase their solubility. You could theoretically, while they're in that dipole moment, in that excited state, collide them with a water molecule. If they overlap, you would have a dissolving process. And so like that became a little over-engineered. We ended up going into that space, but like from a first principles perspective, I'm like, there's no reason that shouldn't work. Yeah. Okay, yeah, you might degrade some of the analytes in the process, but you can run analysis to see how much is too much, so on and so forth. Anyways, so the long and the short of it is we eventually came to the understanding temperature-controlled ultrasonics worked. And so we like just built some hardware, ordered some stuff on Amazon, and we had our own cold brew device to make on demand 20 minutes cold brews done. And so we just pumped out coffee. And in order to like sustain our coffee addiction, we started the coffee club on campus at RIT. So we would get a budget basically from the university. I think it was like a few grand a year. And so that would let us buy like a bigger sonicator, like an industrial size, where we could like really pump out like a ton of coffee. And then also we managed to convince a couple of local coffee shops to donate their coffee to us because they would get a tax donation because they would technically donate it to the university. But we would then extract it and then give it out at like hackathons. So
that's genius.
Yeah. And so that was a way we could bootstrap our sort of demand side and see, oh, what did people think? We could try different kinds of beans. And this is all on the side while doing like the solar cell project. And so at one point, basically with our solar project, we tried to raise venture capital after having spent the 75K. In fact, actually, we were introduced to our first venture capitalists by NYSERDA as part of the 75K program. So it was something akin to the YC, like an accelerator. Yeah. It was more incubatory, but in any event. And the biggest thing that investors would talk to us about is, how do you guys generate a profit? And I'm like, of course, we sell the solar panels. And they're like, okay, how much do you sell them for? We're like, for whatever people will buy them for. And they're like, how much would people buy them for? So we'll go find out. And then they're like, okay, but how much does it cost to make? I'm like, they're expensive right now, but they'll come down with price. And they're like, how much will they come down in price and how long? And I'm like, there's a lot of scientific assumptions there, but they're like, okay, can you give us some reasonable assumptions? So we sat down and we started doing like the math. And what we realized was silicon solar cells, following Moore's law, continued to fall down in price. And you could actually chart this. We're looking at the data. This was back in 2017, 2018 time. From all the way from like the early 2000s, you could just see it would continue to come down in price. And so when we made some healthy assumptions about the science, the engineering, cost curves, exactly, it would never intersect. And so fundamentally, we could never produce a product that was more cost efficient. And just one last piece here. There was two different approaches, two different schools of thought on how you could make perovskites. One was extremely high power, where basically you would think about taking a silicon solar cell and then putting a perovskite layer on top of it to make a tandem cell that would boost the yield. And that would be really useful for like high-end, high-energy capacity like operations or missions or deployments. And what we wanted to go down was this path of very low-cost, high-volume solar. So we would be happy hitting like 10, 12%. But if you could pump them out extremely cheaply, it wouldn't matter. And I learned that basically, if you can cover the square footage of Rhode Island in solar panels, you could basically power the entire US. And so that was the way I was thinking. I was like, let's go high volume. Let's print Rhode Island's surface area. That was kind of the vision. Right. If we can do this, we'll solve climate change. Fuck yeah. Like, I have a path. Let's go. And then it turns out that if you do want to buy a ton of panels, you can just import them from China. They'll sell you polysilicon at pennies now. Like even solar panels installed 5 years ago are significantly more expensive than what you'd buy now. And it just turns out that the cost curves have continued to fall. And even today, when you look back, it was like that was the correct assumption. And so I learned a lot about unit economics, so on and so forth. But in the coffee business, there was like, wait a second. People drink coffee and the price of a latte or a cup of coffee has only gone up over time. And so they're like, like I get to turn this sort of science inventiveness brain into something that can actually make money. And so we decided to seek that out as a business opportunity after we shut down the whole solar cell perovskite ambient PV venture. And we had our start selling cold brew at farmers markets. That was like, how we first started.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
that's...
I can send you some pictures if you want to put it in the show.
No, I would love that. I think the idea of selling or like test running your coffee at hackathon, genius.
Thank you.
Literally the best audience you can target there.
Yeah.
Okay.
If anyone from Harvard wants to use our method to pump the guys full, shoot me an email. I'll tell you how we do. We can open source the technology. Like at this point, I would just like to see it out in the world. I think it's still a good base fundamental technology. I would love to have an easy to use version of it in my kitchen, like whatever. But I got bigger fish to fry at this point.
Yeah, definitely bigger fish to fry. You pivoted then from coffee brewing to Hypnos, which then became Sleepwell.ai.
Yeah, so it was Sleepwell and Hypnos.
Sleepwell and Hypnos.
Yeah,
okay.
Long story arc. How much time do you want to spend on this one? Because I can give you a lot of details.
So this was your YC company
Yes,
in 2019.
Correct.
And so basically it was a digital sleep journal that connects wearables and tries to help people correlate their daily habits with their sleep quality.
Correct.
Is that a good...
That's about right. And what I'll say was this was done before the Huberman Lab. So we had to go collect all this data on our own. This was done before ChatGPT, so we had to do all the data analysis by hand. And so this company would be a lot easier to build these days, but we did it in hard mode. And it turns out that, so Hypnos is sort of the iteration that came after Sleep. Hypnos is basically, like you mentioned, a journal where you can kind of put all this information in and it would automatically calculate this data for you. But Sleep was a sort of sleep coaching service that we sold to VCs, founders, a bunch of people in the Bay Area. And then eventually we went remotely so we could help anyone in the US was we were targeting. And what we would do basically is we would find people that either had a sleep tracker, or if they didn't, we would install one for them. So Withings made a really good sleep tracker you put underneath your bed. You don't need to charge it, whatever. This is not sponsored by Withings.
It's not.
But we basically would help people A/B test different things that would help them with their sleep. Yeah. And what was amazing, we had about 50 different interventions. What was amazing was on average, in about 3 months, we'd help people make a noticeable improvement on their sleep to the point where they're like, cool, I'm happy with where this got me. I actually no longer need your service. And what was interesting about that was like, on one hand, we won. We did it. Like we fixed people's sleep.
But you don't have that recurrent revenue stream.
That's exactly
really
right.
Tricky.
Yes.
I feel like that's also a problem with Whoop. Honestly, in all of these wearables, I got it earlier this summer and I just stopped with it. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but like I truly can't find a great use case.
Yeah.
It tells me how many calories I've burned in the day, tells me like how many hours of sleep I got, my sleep quality, but what do I actually do with that information? Like how do I use that to improve my own habits? And I think that's what got it. At some point, it just felt like this extra thing that I'm just wearing on my wrist.
100%.
And I'm curious about how you feel about, I guess this is hugely popular technology, right? Like
now it is, yeah.
Now it is with like Whoop, Aura, all these different devices of trying to optimize everything about our life and collect every single data point that we can about our human. And in a way, I really love that because it's like democratizing health information to consumers, which I think is going to be the next wave of healthcare.
Totally.
But in another way, it's like genuinely how useful do you think these things are?
Yeah.
Because do you think there's something fundamentally broken about how we're approaching human optimization with technology? Do you think it's useful? And do you think it actually is inducing a sort of anxiety or worry in people that might not really be warranted? You know what I mean?
I think we could spend an entire episode talking about this topic. Having started a company in the space, I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
All right, we might have to back into some of those, but at a high level, I'll give you my personal experience and then we can talk about things generally. Because I did a lot of the quantified self stuff early, I came to understand my body really well. And so initially, if you have no baseline, no data, it's extremely helpful because you don't know what you don't know. If you don't measure it, how can you actually manage it?
Yeah.
After doing that for a few years and seeing my body in different kinds of environments, I've developed rules of thumb to understand what I need to do, such as I need to wear blue light blocking glasses at night. Magnesium is really helpful. I shouldn't have dinner before 3 hours before I go to sleep, avoid hard exercise. I kind of have these lists of things that I do for myself. And this is 80% of the stuff you can get from Ferris or what have you. And then the other 20% is things you have to learn through yourself by experimenting and A/B testing. But after doing that, there's not much of a point to having like an extra wearable you have to monitor and track. And I think a lot of this is really, it's about statistics and then personal desire. I think from the 80-20 perspective, I already got 80% of the value. So that last 20% isn't really that important. Now, if I had a health concern that I was interested in, or I was entering a next phase of my life where I wanted to change some things, maybe it would be interesting to reestablish a baseline and start to collect data again. For example, let's say I wanted to start measuring how different workouts would affect my recovery. Because I was entering a little athletic streak. Maybe I wanted to become a really professional biker or snowboarder or something like that. Then a device like this might be helpful because I'm entering a new domain and I have a new desire. Or I have a health issue that I want to track theoretically. And so in both of these cases, I do think it is helpful. But like roughly, I've just been the same startup grinder for the past decade. And so I have an understanding of roughly what I need to do. Like I don't wear my Oura ring anymore, but it was like a status symbol back in 2018, 2019. You know what I mean? Yeah, I got my Oura ring right here. No, I don't wear it anymore. All that being said, I do have an 8 sleep and it is really helpful. And sometimes I will cross-check it to see what my sleep scores are, but very much I don't need it anymore. And I think,
Yeah.
like you're saying, it does create a ton of anxiety.
Yeah.
And I've seen papers, this is all the way back in 2019 when we were working on this project, where basically there was a study out of some university, I'm blanking on which one, where essentially people who would check their sleep scores, if they didn't have a perfect score or a very high score, would actually report feeling more exhausted than they should.
That is what I'm concerned about, honestly, is that like placebo-ish type of effect where like...
It's called the nocebo effect, by the way.
Nocebo
It's placebo but negative. Yeah, nocebo effect. Yeah.
Learn something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
negative,
like that is like my biggest concern. Oh, I see my strain is really high for today.
Yes.
I guess that means I should stay home and not go to work.
Yeah.
That is like why I stopped wearing Whoop, to be honest. And I wonder if this is like, I'm just curious how Whoop has become so successful. Nothing against Whoop or anything like that. But like, why are the subscriptions are extremely expensive.
They've gone up over time too.
And it's crazy who is actually...
I don't think we're the demographic, right? So like, I think it's probably folks who are older, perhaps. I'm going to throw some stuff out there, but maybe it's like married folks with kids that want to be like, oh, look, sorry, I'm not feeling so great. Like they're trying to find excuses in a quantified way.
Sure.
Maybe it is truly, it's for athletes. I know that there is extreme value there, or people who want to go down the athletic path. Maybe it's for folks who are very interested in trying to get up to speed on their health. Because if you think about, let's say they have 1 million, 10 million users, there's 8 billion people on the planet, right? So they can churn through that. There's so many different folks that they can go ahead and acquire. And if someone stays for an average 3 to 5 years, and then maybe circumstances in their life changes, maybe when I'm at 40, I'm like, okay, I want to start checking in, see how my heart rate variability has changed or what have you. Maybe I'll resubscribe. But I think for folks our age, it's not as useful. And then also, if you want to think about a unique data quality perspective, like actually thinking about, for example, maybe there's some insights about your health that would be valuable to, for example, someone that wants to run a clinical trial. Perhaps you're someone that has a specific sleep issue, right? Sleep apnea, for example. Maybe actually having that data that you could provide to someone who's recruiting for like a sleep trial would make you a better candidate for that recruitment or would enrich your value as a patient. So we can think about a utilitarian perspective that was purely for your medical data or purely from an R&D perspective. But I do think that these wearables, they're decent. I've gotten results from them. But I think there's only so much you can optimize. There's only so much 80-20 you can get out of it. And really what I would love to see, and there's a few folks working on stuff like this, is like continuous monitoring of, for example, neurotransmitters in the brain or like blood biomarkers, such as like ApoB or ghrelin, insulin, glucose, human growth hormone, all these other testosterone, progesterone, so on and so forth. Imagine if you could have a device that was like a continuous glucose meter that could constantly check in on those. I think that would be a huge unlock. And there are folks working on that.
Right. Just
saying how your sleep went.
Yeah.
There's only, or like how intense your strain is. I also think there's a bit of like mind over matter there too. Are you really going to let a device tell you how good you are or aren't? I think part of this is we live in a bit of an algorithmic world where people are used to having an AI on TikTok or Twitter telling them what they should do. And I think for some people that is useful, right? Like that maybe they don't have enough agency to drive themselves. So having someone that is directing them as an oracle might be helpful. But I think for folks like me and you, we know what we want to do in life. We might know what we want. And so we'd rather tell an AI what I want it to do than have an AI tell me what I should do.
That actually I've been thinking recently about what is the future of healthcare. I don't know if you've been thinking about this. I have a suspicion that healthcare is going to be increasingly automated. Automated? I don't know if that's the correct.
Automatized, maybe?
Yeah,
We're going to have automatons in the AI.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I have a suspicion that in 10, 15 years, doctors will be AI.
I hope so. At least I hope that we have, and we don't get trapped in regulatory bureaucratic bullshit that prevents people from getting access to a digital AI-enabled doctor or a pure AI doctor. And even if it's like you have to sign some rights that says this is technically not a diagnosis, you need to go to a board-certified physician, but still people are using the technology that way. And there are 8 billion people, and how many of them, like oftentimes you hear this conversation about universal healthcare. It's like, a lot of people want that. How do you enable that? AI is a phenomenal way for us to scale to get there. Yeah, I'm 100% on the boat with you.
Yeah. It would just cut costs so dramatically.
100%.
And I think the biggest thing will be the regulatory. And do you think there's also going to be a huge culture kind of perception that we have to try and get over? What do you think is going to be like the activation energy for that type of future? Do you think it's regulatory, culture? I don't think it'll be cost. Do you think it's a tech thing? I don't think it'll be a tech thing, but I'm just curious.
So I think right now we already see many examples. You can go on Reddit, on Twitter, wherever, and see that there's so many people who have gotten support from using ChatGPT to help them catch something that the doctors missed. And I think as we hit 6 sigma in accuracy and hallucinations go to 0, these only get better. And so I've even seen teams that are explicitly hiring professionals in like radiology or in spine care to specifically hand label data for an AI to train it to be as good, if not better than the average person. And I think Microsoft has one of these. Like, to me, technologically, it's inevitable. People are already using it. I have used it in order to give me some feedback. Obviously, it's not the last thing that I use, but it is super helpful and has accelerated opinions for what I might want to do with my own health. And I think there's also democratization and access angle there that's really important from a like philosophy or humanitarian perspective that I think is really useful. So not technology. I think regulatorily will be a huge issue. Yeah. I think culturally, there will always be some group of folks who will want to talk to a human. And in the same way that we have like AI chess solvers that are better than Magnus Carlsen and the best chess players, we still like to tune in to see humans playing chess with each other, right? That's just like who we are. It's how nature evolved us. Yeah. And so I think similarly, we will always want to have a care team of people telling us like, hey, because being a doctor isn't just about delivering a diagnosis, right? It's about, part of it's therapy, part of it is context, part of it is understanding, part of it is family history. And part of it is being a shoulder to cry on if someone gets really bad disease. So I think that aspect will always be there, but I think culturally I've already seen that people are willing to use AI more and more. Like I feel like when I talk to some folks who are AI maxis, I'm underusing AI. Like I use ChatGPT on a daily basis, but there's some people who are like, yeah, I spend 16 hours using this thing. And I'm like, that's crazy. Wow. Yeah. And the kinds of things they'll ask it is like, hey, they'll upload all their text. Oh, was I debating this thing with my partner? Who's right? Who's wrong? Was I manipulative? Am I getting gaslit? All these different things. And so we're already seeing culturally, and this obviously with younger folks, that they're already using AI for everything. Yeah. So I don't think that it'll necessarily be a cultural issue, but I think fundamentally we will still want humans somehow involved in the care process. Yeah. And so I think that's a little bit of it. And then also, we do want to make sure that there is a proliferation and multiple opportunities or options for these different AI systems, because when you have centralization, you have the potential to like corrupt or to abuse that power. And so I think being able to have access to different kinds of AI or multiple versions of them to cross-check as well reduces the number of errors and reduces the chance that you're actually getting bad information, or that system that is downstream of your answer has been coerced or manipulated in some kind of way. We've already seen people like prompt injecting AIs or AIs going off the rails. Yeah, I think there's a lot you can say there, and I think it's inevitable. The question is, what will it look like? And I'm hoping the US leads that race, but it might be that it happens a lot. Like it'll be competition that forces us to innovate, as opposed to, it reminds me of the Winston Churchill quote, which is the Americans will do the right thing only after everything else has been tried. So hopefully that's not the situation with medical AI. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I've heard that you shouldn't give ChatGPT its own text, or it's like you shouldn't re-prompt, or if ChatGPT spits something out, like you shouldn't give it back to ChatGPT and say, yeah, I've heard stuff about that it doesn't do well with its own outputs that it spits out.
That's interesting.
So I'm interested like how AI doctor validated by multiple AI doctors, how that would.
Yeah.
I agree that the cultural perception is definitely improving with AI. Like I know a lot of my friends that are like, like sometimes I will like literally have conversations with the voice mode ChatGPT, and like it's genuinely helpful, like when you don't have anyone or if you have no one to call, like talking,
or you're really distressed and you also don't want to hear from someone else, you just want like one way.
Exactly. I think AI therapy might be a bit of a stretch, but certainly
I think it's already a thing.
Really?
Yeah, informally. Like there's no therapy mode from ChatGPT. But like and Anthropic has a life stuff mode. It's like a little coffee emoji. I've never used it, but I'm assuming that's one of the ways you could. And then there's people will often. So I talked to this guy in San Francisco a couple weeks ago during the Deep Tech Week, and he told me that he's an AI researcher, and he found it to be more helpful than his actual therapist, because he could upload all this context of his life into it. And so it would have, and like, it was a little cagey about some of the details because the press but I don't know if that means medical history or that means previous issues, so on and so forth. But basically at a certain point, if the context window and the memory is good enough, then you could theoretically upload all the information you have to this agent, to this LLM, and then it'll get to know you over time, and it might say, hey, you're doing that thing. It might prompt you to CBT yourself if you're like, oh, you're falling into a negative spiral, or you're washing away like negative feedback. You're doing confirmation bias again, whatever the case might be. If someone hasn't built that yet, they should. You'd have a lot of users, but people are already informally hacking systems to make it do that for them.
Yeah, interesting. Like, we were talking about this in one of our classes, but if you train an LLM on every single piece of medical literature in existence, why the hell would it not be smarter than your average doctor?
For sure.
It will be more quote unquote intelligent.
Correct. It'll have more breadth, undoubtedly, like verifiably. Right? Yeah.
Totally.
And this is something we learned during sleep, which was doctors only spend a couple of days in the entirety of their medical school training on sleep. And so if you are a sleep researcher, of course, more than the average doctor. Now, folks can do research on the side, so on and so forth, but part of like mandatory requirements is very thin. And in terms of like sleep research and sleep understanding. And so when you take that to the next level and you say, what else are there the minimum requirements to basically being passable or to getting some kind of a degree in something are there? You realize that like humans do a lot of compressing of information. And it happens to be that unlike LLMs, humans do a really good job of continuing to learn on the job and like continuing to like self-direct in where they might have blind spots, so on and so forth. But an LLM is just built with like you said, the entire corpus. And so of course they have way more breadth than any human can. And I think in that way, there will always be really great companions to humans. And like one of my hot takes is where we are right now in the trajectory of AI won't actually be a replacement for humans. Humans will remain their status as like the top species for some time. And I think we're more complementary than we are competitive. Now, we could have new fundamental architectures that completely change that. Like we could break through and say, we have actually figured out how to make proper neural simulations at like orders of magnitude lower power efficiency, or sorry, higher power efficiency than what organic compute is. But until we get there, and I don't see any research that suggests we're getting close, I don't think humans are going to lose their status. At least good humans. We can debate what that is, but yeah.
That's reassuring.
To be determined.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about Web3 and decentralized science. So you are the chief science officer at Bioprotocol, which is a Web3 native financial layer for decentralized science designed to fund, govern, and commercialize early stage biotech projects through a network of BioDAOs. Maybe we can talk about a little bit about what that is, but I want to start with just de-risking this idea, maybe to folks who aren't familiar with like crypto, right? Crypto is a scary word for a lot of people, especially in science and in traditional academic settings. People might immediately think, oh, like this is a scam, just with everything that's happened in crypto in the last 10 years. Talk to me, just talk to me about this idea of putting science funding and IP on chain and how cryptocurrencies might actually facilitate more equitable funding in biotech.
Totally. So maybe we can just start with where I think there's the least amount of skepticism towards crypto.
Sure.
So right now, I would say cryptocurrencies broadly have undebatable, even against the largest critics, product market fit in two categories. The first is Bitcoin as a digital form of gold or a store of value. Now you can debate, does gold have value? Should it be valuable? So on and so forth. But you assume that gold does, and not just for its industrial applications, but for the story, the narrative associated with it, the preciousness associated with it. Then Bitcoin is basically a digital version of that scarcity programmed in computer code that's protected by trillions of dollars worth of compute and energy. So that's one. And then the second is what we call stable coins in the industry. And these are basically US dollar coins that are regulated and backed one-to-one with either real US dollars or with notes from the federal government that allow you to have a digital representation of that dollar that people can go ahead and use and transact freely with. This is such an important technology that like Visa and MasterCard have adopted them and they're using them. PayPal has its own version of the stablecoin. It's called PYUSD. It's got like many billions of dollars already back behind it and transacted through it. Stripe, which is one of the biggest financial technology companies, has been acquiring crypto companies like crazy, and they offer USDC and stablecoins as part of the products that they serve. And so another way to basically think about where crypto is today is it's just a new version of financial technology. It's fintech. And in the same way that Robinhood was an innovation on Charles Schwab, you can think about like Coinbase or crypto as an innovation on top of Bank of America or Chase. The fundamental technology that underpins all of this is basically a set of computer code that allows people to independently verify, without the need of a bank as an intermediary, that two parties have indeed transacted in a fair and trustworthy manner. So if you think about this sort of peer-to-peer transactability that is not government mediated, because we figured out what's called the Byzantine generals problem. If for any folks that want to do some deep research, we have essentially provably created a mechanism that anyone can interact with anyone else in this system. And it happens to be that the medium of exchange that they interact with is this currency, Bitcoin or Ethereum or what have you. And so fundamentally, it's like a freedom of information and of a transaction technology. That's basically what it boils down to. Now, you can apply that technology in a bunch of different ways. And there's a bunch of bad ways that it's been applied. FTX is like a common example people point to, creating what we call like scam coins or shit coins or meme coins. I don't love those, but those are very easy to use example. And because this is computer code, it's very easy for anyone to copy and paste and just make their own versions of these things. Now, they're different just because you like copy and paste, let's call it a picture of someone's Lambo, doesn't mean you own it, right? In the same way someone can copy and paste the code to Bitcoin and make it like my special Bitcoin, doesn't mean that it's valuable. But it is just fundamentally a piece of software architecture that allows anyone to make some sort of an asset that can be freely transacted and traded without the need for intermediary. Now, Bio is applying this. Actually, let me take a step back before that. There's a lot of projects that have thought, okay, how can we apply this base level of technology for different kinds of end applications? And I would say one of the more successful ones is permissionless loans. So, I need $1,000, you have $1,000. You can either give me that $1,000 and then hope that I pay you back, or we can write a piece of code that would basically put that money into escrow, where I would put up something else that worth $1,000 as collateral and promise that if I don't pay you back, or I will pay you back, and if I don't in 3 months, then you get my collateral plus some interest. Normally, you'd have to go again to a bank and you'd have to resolve that in a court system. But with computer code, if you have the collateral you can put up, it just happens automatically. You don't need permission from anyone else. It's just like you and I transacting. This concept is broadly applicable. And we thought, what if we could apply this to scientific research, scientific financing, and the collectivization of patients and scientists to creating research networks? So when we think about Bio protocol, we are basically exploring the idea maze, is how I like to describe it, of what can this base fundamental technology do with the intersection of science. And so I've taken all of the learnings through all of the projects I've started, all the venture capital I've raised, all the R&D that I've done, and applied it into this framework to see kind of what pops out. And one of our earliest hypotheses was always the tokenization or the financialization of scientific intellectual property. So scientific IP is a multi-hundred billion, maybe even $1 trillion market, but it's very opaque and it looks very similar to the real estate markets. Zillow came in and completely revolutionized real estate. And so if you could have this sort of transparency layer or this valuation layer backed by analytics on intellectual property, perhaps you can increase the transactability of scientific intellectual property the same way Zillow did and all these other real estate technology firms did for real estate. Obviously, there are differences. Real estate is physical, digital properties is not, IP is not, it's more metaphorical. But nevertheless, where I say we've found really great product market fit is in helping researchers find access to new forms of capital for their R&D. So very much in the same way that when I was, how old was I? 19, when I asked the Engineers for a Sustainable World for a few $100 for my first perovskite materials so I could do my first research, there was no one that had to intermediate that, right? Like the government wasn't ready to give me money. Frankly, I probably wasn't ready to receive it. The dean of the school hadn't written me a grant yet. And so instead, it was just two people deciding that they're going to interact with it because they see it a fair transaction of value. And what is represented in that exchange is in the crypto case, a token. And so similarly, we found a lot of incredible researchers doing things from hair loss research to women's reproductive health to longevity science to finding cures for long COVID, all the way through really crazy things like trying to explore if there's a link between quantum mechanics and biology. And all of those individual research groups, we've helped them create networks where other scientists, other patients, other collaborators can come in and they can work together and they have sort of a medium of exchange or medium of counting people's contributions, whether they do data analysis, whether they provide information, whether they do like marketing, branding, awareness, so on and so forth. And then those networks that all fly into that same flag, fly into that same token, can then use the capital markets, the crypto markets, to fundraise for what the mission is of each individual research network. And so we facilitate the creation of those networks, the financialization, the acceleration of them. And I have run an accelerator before. I was a venture capitalist for a period. I did Y Combinator. And so I'm basically taking like all of the science, learning, science information, all of the VC financing, accelerator stuff. And then it's been a very wild ride to learn a lot about crypto, but I've also played around in the space and kind of putting that all together in this new space. And we're very early in the idea maze of what this could even create, but it stems from a desire for me to accelerate science and to push forward against a veil of ignorance and move innovation in the scientific space forward. And this is just one of the many ways that I think it can be done. Yeah. That was a lot, but.
Yeah. So you create the financial layer to allow for autonomous organizations to basically transact between the researchers who are doing the science and everyone else who wants to be involved in that science, right?
Correct.
And those people, those everyone else can be patients.
Yes.
They can be other researchers.
Yep.
They can be just your everyday investor who transacts on frequently using cryptocurrencies, right? Or who believes in a project and wants to have stake in that. And that is a very diverse audience, right?
Oh, it's massive. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's not how traditional funding works.
No, not at all.
The way that funding works at early stage academia is you have PIs. You have people who have been doing research for 40 years deciding these things should be funded because this is what I've been working on and this is what I think is going to work in the space. And then you have your venture capitalists who are arguably maybe less experienced than the people who are funding academic grants in the science.
Most of them, yeah. There's some good VCs out there. A lot of them,
But a lot of them are more experienced in how do I create upside versus what technologies will work. So that's why I think VCs need things to be so de-risked so much.
For sure, 100%.
Is because they have no idea.
For sure.
Work, right?
Oh yeah.
So they can understand the financials of it way better, I think, than they understand the science, at least compared to like academic.
But to your point, if these projects are not yet ready for venture financing, but there's a collective of scientists that are like, wait, this is a really good idea.
Yeah.
And this is maybe a little too unorthodox for traditional university grant, or a lot of government grants got cut in the new administration. Yeah. They can say, what if we put our funding together? We just need $10K to buy first materials to run an experiment. Now they have a coordination mechanism that they can go ahead and do that. They can issue a token. They can put their funds together. They now have a collective pool that records who put in how much. Yeah. They can go do the work. They can actually allocate tokens or points for whoever did which kind of work in that scientific value chain. Yeah. And then if it works, well, now you've bootstrapped your way into potentially the next step. In much the same way that I bootstrapped by a few $100s into my next grant, and we just go off from there.
You guys sit in this really like perfect, I think, intermediary space where the science hasn't been de-risked to the point where you can go to investors, or you shouldn't go, honestly, at that early stage.
They won't listen to you. You can, but they're like, come back.
Come back and give us some preclinical. Yeah, exactly.
But by the way, we call that space the Valley of Death.
Valley of Death. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so you guys sit at that interesting space between, honestly, I would say even like earlier or like more risky than traditional academic research, and definitely far more risky or unorthodox than what might be backed by a VC. So you have really found that niche down there, like at the very start of let's just see if we can have these no go or no go points. Let's validate those points. Yeah. And if it works, then people will see that it works and they'll invest a higher stake in that project or in that piece of IP, whatever comes out of that.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things here is there have been similar attempts in the past at different versions of doing this. So like experiment.com is one that I really like, where people can go ahead and they can just fund scientific experiments. But you don't have any voice or stake in the outcome of that scientific experiment. So that you don't have a governance token that'll let you express yourself or articulate a message with some voting power associated with it to the scientific network.
Sure. You
don't have a way to be compensated or have your contributions be measured if you do end up doing some marketing for that group, or if you do some data analysis, or if you help run the experiment yourself. And there's other mechanisms as well, but we haven't found anything that sort of hits this perfect like combination. And what I think is really cool is we have been doing this. So we call this category decentralized science. It's been around for, depending on how far back you go, there's early ideas around scientific networks for funding any kind of research through this kind of a collective structure that we industry call a DAO, from all the way back in like 2017 or 2015, I should say, when Vitalik was like, Vitalik, for those who don't know, is the co-founder of Ethereum. He had this idea of the first DAO, which is the first sort of network where people would put ETH together and fund different projects. It turned out to be like an on-chain fund, but that was taken to another level with Vita DAO, which is the first scientific DAO that we created. Basically, it was one focused around longevity biotech. And these sort of entities and what possibilities can come out of them have evolved a lot over time. I didn't expect the success we have a group called Hair DAO.
Yeah.
And they've been one of the most successful out of all the projects we've ever spun up, because this is a group of two really passionate young men who were losing their hair back in high school. And they just started trying a bunch of supplements all the way back in high school. It's crazy. One of the co-founders, his nickname is Patches, because he would have patches of missing hair. Yeah, it's insane. And so they were like, look, we know there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the US that are suffering. We're going to create a network to help them all try and find support. They started sharing what worked. And then all of a sudden there was enough critical mass there that people wanted to finance some of this research. And they have continued to go up from there. It's been actually really crazy. They've filed some provisional patents. They've worked with one of the leading hair researchers, Dr. Rolf Paus. They have a lab in New York where they're actually like applying chemistries onto scalps to see how they regrow. They've actually done their first decentralized trial with people like actually putting them on their own scalp, taking photos, sharing them back so you can see how things have progressed. Fundamentally, there's not enough, I think, effort going into and money going into solving the world's biggest problems. And we have more problems than we have people working on them. And so I think this can be a really strong nexus point, some version of this, but I hope it's bio, that can accelerate and create the right incentive structure to get the world's biggest problems financed and solved by the world's best people.
Yeah, no, I love that.
In a nutshell.
So the people that are making these decisions of what gets funded, what are the next steps, this governance, as you're referring to, these people are, again, patients, researchers, but also like crypto bros.
Some of them are, yeah, it's true.
Degens,
Yeah,
I've heard that term get tossed around a lot.
Yep.
Why? I'm totally on board with this idea of we found that there's nothing that exists for this, and we're going to make something that exists for this niche that you guys have occupied.
Correct.
But what maybe are things that can go wrong when you start letting people who don't know much about science or they don't know much about what projects should get funded or what might actually work?
Totally.
Are there any dangers in that?
I think there are downsides. And I often tell the scientists that we work with, look, no matter what structure you go down, let's say you want to try and raise venture capital, there's always downsides to that.
Yeah.
Like to every coin, there's another side. If you want to go get an academic grant or a grant from the government, there's downsides and costs to doing that. If you would like to do your work inside of a research institution or inside of a research lab of a commercial company, there's downsides to doing that. There's the same kind of downsides to doing something through a crypto mechanism. One of those is the permissionless nature of crypto. So that means anyone can participate. And so as a result, you get folks who treat your moonshot of trying to cure cancer or cure long COVID as a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
And then they become upset when their lottery ticket doesn't immediately turn them into gratified money. Yeah. So that is one of the consequences or one of the realities that you open yourself up to in this kind of a space. And we're learning through how these things work and how to iterate upon them and how to make them less prone to downsides. Yeah. We are a startup. We're iterating our way there. But what I'll say is that science also has a bit of a longer term horizon than most crypto folks that are involved typically take. And so we're trying to think about how do we try and align these. And
that is something I'm actually really interested. It's like, it makes sense for why scientists would want to be on board with this. Why would crypto people want to be on board with this? Because
that's
maybe
a good question.
For problems that are more, that might hit closer to home, like hair loss or something where I want a solution.
Exactly. Brian Armstrong, come on, where are you?
Yeah.
No, it's part of his brand. So, it's not changing.
But other than that, right, you're right. These horizons are very long, much longer than I would expect this sort of audience to want to take the long haul on. You know what I mean? Do these people truly believe there's an upside to investing in these projects? Is it that they're like personally motivated by them? Or is it like a specific, if you have the crypto community, there's a small subgroup of them who are like more willing to like be patient, I guess, than like others in the community.
Absolutely. So all of the above. If you look at a pie chart of all the different personalities, you get everything under the sun. But one thing they all share in common is a belief in the future. of technology. And fundamentally, like crypto is still in this phase where it is like kind of future-oriented technology. It's not yet fully mainstream. And so to be involved in the crypto space, you have to believe that tomorrow is going to look better than yesterday, at least implicitly. Otherwise, you're going to be working with a technology that's trying to disrupt the status quo in a better way. And you see a ton of different types of personalities that are involved. And I would say that the projects that do the best are those that have the largest part of that pie, are people who are patient and understand. And it turns out that a lot of the folks who do get involved and contribute in the space are professional investors who have funds, and so they know what they're doing. And so these are different from your traditional like biotech VCs, where biotech VCs used to doing like a safe note or maybe like a price round, that they're used to like a data room with like pharmacokinetics, and they want to know who's the scientific advisory board.
Yeah.
Whereas like in crypto, like all these addresses, by the way, are all anonymous. So it's also hard to tell who it is that's getting involved. If that's the other slice of the permissionlessness. And so, but again, it's one way I like to think about this is, and this probably goes to show my chemistry slant, is everything that you work with has a certain material property to it. And it turns out that like crypto, as it is, has certain material properties to it. It's permissionless, it's peer-to-peer, it's semi-anonymous, because all of the addresses that actually, like the wallets that transact, you don't know whose is who. Obviously, I can tell you, oh yeah, this is mine, and I can prove it. But if people want to remain anonymous, there's a lot of, it's by default that way. So there's a lot of pros and cons, and we just kind of have to roll with the punches and work through what some of those, the system details there are. But fundamentally, I think the reason even someone who might be more of a speculator gets involved is because they've seen a lot of the projects have done well. Like HairDAO, like I mentioned, has seen a tremendous appreciation from when it first launched. And so I think while people should not look at these as gambling assets, like I don't want to enable people to just buy lottery tickets. I don't think that's how science should be funded. Fundamentally, it is about a coordination technology, because you see in areas, particularly with this rare disease, or really frankly, any disease, people are already investing their own time, their own capital into financing and trying to solve their problem, that if you get a group of 100 of those people together and they put their money together, they are going to get better outcomes than if they do so individually. They can share more information, and they have a coordination mechanism for which they can do that. And so that is the interest. It's building for those types of folks. No matter what you build in, there's always going to be people that kind of bandwagon, think this thing is cool. They're going to try and take it into some other trajectory. But by and large, I would say that's the minority of the people that are involved. But nevertheless, because you're in crypto, you're going to have some of that wildness, some of that craziness there. But to me, that's noise. And the signal I want to focus towards is like, how can we help deliver better scientific outcomes? How can we help patients improve the quality of their lives? And this is just one of the costs in that process, frankly.
Yeah. I think I really would love to see some asset come out of this, that maybe it's a drug, maybe it's something that's approved, and that would be like, look, guys, like this works. Like,
yes.
This can actually produce valuable research.
100%. So we have some proof points of that already. There are a few drugs right now that we're seeking ways in order to test them in a traditional clinical trial. Obviously, like I don't want to reveal anything that I can't, so on and so forth, but we are very much exploring what are the traditional routes for us to validate the chemistries and the other things that come out of these research networks to make sure that they work. Like I mentioned, HairDAO is running a decentralized trial already. You can see actually that they recently tweeted, so they have papers that have come out. So papers have actually been written by these networks, but you can also see a Twitter video where they show what the delta is. They literally like scan people's square centimeters of their hair for thickness and hair density. So you can actually quantify what the change in before and after was with the application of one of their therapeutics. So you can actually see, right, there's real data coming out of these. And I think fundamentally, like I mentioned, DeSci is a coordination and a financialization technology, but because of biotech being the way it is, it has to eventually interface with the real world. And so that means it takes the time it normally takes for interfacing with the real world to move its way through. And as someone who's worked most of my life in the world of atoms, I'm comfortable with that. I know that it takes time. And so I think I have no problem understanding that this is going to go down the right path. And the right path means we got to wait here for the validation to come. You can't just shortcut that. You can't just say, yes, I would like the result to be X. And then, it doesn't work that way.
I think that is honestly what is super unique about your background and the different verticals that you've transcended. Like you are at heart a deep tech scientist.
Yeah, 100%.
You know how freaking hard it is.
It's insanely hard. Yeah.
And coming back to that, like I have been thinking about recently, and this might be the last question that we get to. I don't want to hold you here.
Been a pleasure.
Totally. I have found that in deep tech particularly, in order to be one of the first or the first people to solve a problem, the problem either needs to be very hard to solve, just technically, it needs to be very expensive, or it needs to be just like socially unacceptable or controversial.
Unorthodox.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those are all have very high activation barriers. So,
Yes.
but the smart people, they go and tackle the hard stuff, right?
Yes.
The rich people, they bankroll the expensive stuff.
Correct.
And then the ludicrous, don't give a fuck kind of people, they like go after the taboo. I've had Haitian Quay on this podcast, and I'm not sure what he germline edited the twin embryos in China.
He's infamous and a legend. No, I respect that.
Yes,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
And there's like other examples as well. I'm sure you've heard of like nucleus genomics.
Of course.
Yeah, like they go after like very controversial stuff, and that is almost gets them like free marketing, right?
Genetic dating or dating based on your
dating based on or like selecting embryos based on your
dating,
genetics.
Yes,
and so it's like you get free marketing, and if it's a good idea, VCs will back you because of all of that.
And it has the capacity to return positive investments on your capital.
Yeah.
So you have to have a positive.
Exactly. It needs to be venture scale. It has to be a good idea.
Correct.
And with all of that, like you get backers. I feel. I'm just like really curious about through all the different verticals you've transcended. If you had to pick one of these lanes to go with, for any founder who's very young and still trying to think of the problem that they want to devote the next 8 to 10 years of their life
That's
on.
how long it takes, if not longer.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think feels the most, I don't want to say optimal, but what do you think is the best combination of like upside, of changing the world in a meaningful way, and just like pure intellectual vitality and interest?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it does. And it's a hard question to answer because you can't prescribe one thing for everyone. Like the beauty of it is that there's a different right answer for different types of people. And so maybe what I can do is I can demonstrate archetypes for all of them.
Yeah.
Okay. In the case of scientifically challenging, if you have some kind of a research direction or some kind of alpha in that, in being able to solve a problem that no one else can solve, you realize either something's being looked over, perhaps you're in the right lab, you're working with the right scientist, the right PI, the right network, whatever, and you have a thesis that you can actually like prove there's some feedback loop that shows that you're going to work. I think that's extremely cool. The challenge with that is you have to make sure that whatever research you're doing there, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's useful. Like it's hard to collide particles in a Large Hadron Collider. That doesn't mean that it's going to have a high commercial output. So I would just be wary to say, forecast your miracles and assume they're going to come true. You're like, cool, we've developed a teleporter. You're like, okay, fantastic. Who would buy that? And you're like, okay, actually, there's a lot of people who might want to buy a teleporter. Great. So that seems like a reasonable path to go down. But you have to be very honest and very intellectually brutal here to say, is the same way I had to with the cost curves of silicon, for example. Will you just be able to teleport one atom, or can you teleport an entire house? Because if you can do one but not the other, you can imagine the expected value calculations are very different.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing to say that this hard thing that I've been working on or trying to solve is not actually useful. I feel like
there's a lot of ego involved, right?
I've conflated difficulty and technical challenge with utility, but I'm learning that's actually not true.
It's not. And it hurts to have that realization, because if you're anything like me, I think the difficulty of a problem technically almost has its own level of respect and credibility that it comes with. But credibility doesn't mean impact.
Totally.
See, if you're the one who solves the Navier-Stokes equation, like you're going to get a ton of credibility for that. And I don't know that you're going to get a lot of, it's not patentable per se. It's just a mathematical equation. It'll help a ton with industry. But but besides getting street cred, you're not going to become wealthy.
Yeah.
And this is all to say, like, I want to take a step back. Wealth shouldn't be the goal. I think that a lot of folks, particularly who are thinking about startups, see startups as a way to get rich. And there's a lot of ways in the world to get rich. I don't think that this is the best way to do it. I would only pursue a startup if it's the way for you to answer a fundamental question that you are really hungry to answer, and there's no other way to do it, right? Yeah, it might be that it's the way to continue your research direction. But remember, the reason that I started my first solar cell printing project was because I wanted to solve climate change, and I thought I could do it economically, right? I believe through capitalism, if you're able to produce a superior product at a lower cost, the distribution will take care of itself. It becomes sustainable. It multiplies on its own. And once I realized that fundamental assumption was false, instead of fighting against reality, I moved somewhere else. So that also takes a lot. It was hard. Like it took a long time. It was my first baby. So it is non-trivially challenging, but it's something that's important to do. Okay, that was the tough scientific technical one. The wealth one, if it requires a lot of money, that one's really tricky. So like I would say there's a lot of problems that require a lot of money to solve. And the way you would approach that problem is to show some minimally viable results that would allow you to prove that you can get to the next hill. And that if you continue to hit one series of hills after the next, one milestone after the next, that it actually cascades in the domino effect that lets you knock down the space. And I think Tesla is a great example, or SpaceX is another great example, which is if we can produce cars that are electric, that are more fun to drive, it's going to cost a lot of money, but we can actually own the entire car market. And Tesla is the leader in electric cars. But there's a lot of capital involved there. So you have to prove that you can do it. Or if you're lucky, you either know the right people or you're born into wealth. And then the last one was the unorthodox, crazy, if that's there. I think this is like a very big one on personality. If you have the kind of personality where you don't care what people think, I think that's a great opportunity. And I think that's not everyone. If you are also comfortable with being disagreeable or being unliked or feel that this is the only way to expand the Overton window, I think that's really useful as well. I think that there is maybe something to be said around, or to ask yourself to think from a first principles perspective, like what taboos exist for a reason versus what don't. Or like what things should be debated maybe longer than just, yes, there's a bunch of red tape here. I'm in a fiery rage. I'm just going to burn through it all. Like maybe, for those who don't know, there's something called Chesterson's fence. Is this thought experiment or philosophy that like something may be built there for a reason that you don't understand. And so if you tear it down, you actually may suffer second order consequences of not knowing why it was put up originally. So just make sure that if you are going to do that third path, you've done the math and you've realized other people are wrong. You're right. In the same way I did with my PI, I was like, I did the math. He was wrong. I was right. So that was a conventional unorthodox. And I would say that sort of the D-side play, like marrying crypto and science together is another one of those like unorthodox. But I just knew fundamentally this was the right way to do things. The current way is not enough. Academia is not supporting scientists well enough. We can't. Something I love to say is we cannot expect the government to come save us as patients or as scientists. We need to figure out how we can save ourselves. And I think this using crypto as a framework of freedom technologies and coordination, it gives us one way. It's not the only way, but it gives us one way for us to save ourselves. And I think citizen scientists are extremely powerful, underrated, so on and so forth. Education is one of the most important tools to uplift folks. If you are going to go down this more heretical path, just make sure that you are not doing it because you want to be cool, but because you have something that you fundamentally believe is right and is good for people. That one feels like the most dangerous, but also very rewarding if you're right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like you're right. I feel like people view startups as a way to generate wealth quickly.
Yeah. Most startups fail. I've had so many failures in my experiences, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not guaranteed.
It's not at all. Yeah. I guess if it works, it has the greatest multiple, you might say, compared to anything else. But there's a huge amount of risk that would deter, I think, a lot of people that want to get rich quick. Or
you can also join an existing company, like or an existing startup. But frankly, there's a lot of peers that I went to school with, a lot of great friends of mine from RIT that went off to go work at like Microsoft or Google. And I was graduating class of 18. And the folks there, right, if you compound it across 7 years, all the appreciation, their stock compensation, they're doing very well, right? And it's like, startups are not the only way. I think there's a bit of an anxiety in folks in our generation and younger that like a term I've heard is you need to hyper gamble yourself into relevance into the future before like AGI takes over and there's no upward mobility. And I think that while it can be a good motivating force, if that's the reason you do something, I think that you're taking a poor bet there. And so I would just say startups aren't the only way. There are many paths. And it reminds me of the Steve Jobs quote, which is, you cannot connect the dots looking forwards. You can only connect them looking backwards. And so just pursue what is the best path. Oh, and also Brian Armstrong said something along the lines of action produces information. So just keep doing stuff, keep fucking around. You'll keep finding out, and then continue to make the best decision you can with the information you have at the time. And eventually you'll figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I think the conversation has come to a natural sort of end there. So I know it's been like, what?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been 1.5 hours. Yeah. So I don't want to keep you.
It's been lovely.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
It was a pleasure.